Okay, so let's get into the program for today. You can see that we're going to cover quite a few areas there. What is transdisciplinarity and what is it not? And when we're going to discuss that, I'm going to explain to you my understanding of the similarities and differences between mono, inter, multi, and transdisciplinarity. It's 4 different methodologies. They're not the same. They're overlapping areas, but they're not the same. How to do transdisciplinarity. We're going to talk about the process, principles, and methods. And I'll explain that in more detail. And then the other 2 questions, basic questions, when do we use transdisciplinarity and when not? And for what? For what purposes should we use it? There, I'm going to do that by referring quite a bit to the importance of context. That context matters hugely. It doesn't just matter, it matters hugely. And we're going to explain that in more detail. Then I'll also share with you some learning experiences that we picked up in a particular case study called the Enkanini case study. It's an informal settlement just outside Stellenbosch. That was our first attempt. That was our first attempt to actually initiate officially a transdisciplinary case study. We got some funding from the NRF for that, and that's what we did. And I'll share something around that with you as well, just to show you that it's not just theory. We also try to practice it. We got our hands really dirty with that. Okay, and then this morning session, we will then hopefully all the learnings that we will have and gain, try and plow that back into this afternoon's interactive session for those of you that will be attending that session, because there the emphasis is going to be more on how do we build, form, constitute transdisciplinary research teams. And that's not easy. So we will focus this afternoon. There's an interactive exercise we're going to work through to help you better understand how do we get going. If we want to call ourselves as transdisciplinary researchers, how do we start? Where do we start? And that is what the purpose of this afternoon will be. Now, when I looked at the list, you guys sitting here, I realized this is quite a diverse group of people here in terms of your not just demographics, but also in terms of your disciplinary constitution here and interest. And the challenge for me in this is that I can fall between 2 chairs. I can either become too theoretical and miss the practical side of things, or I become too practical and I miss out on the theoretical side of things. That's my challenge, and you'll have to help me to navigate this. And the way I want to do that is to say I'm going to try and go through my presentation part, the more sort of theoretical part, quite quickly, 20 minutes or so, and then I'm going to open it up for discussions. And then I'm going to have to ask you to please lead me. Ask me the questions that matter to you most. And we'll see whether it's more theoretical or practical kind of questions. Okay. So therefore, I'm going to ask you to please take some notes as I'm going to go through now. I'm going to go quite quickly. So please take some notes so that we can open up for in-depth Q&A discussion at the end of it. Just a reminder again, the literature, I'm going to refer to quite a lot of literature, books and articles throughout my lecture. And all of that you've already made available. It is available on Teams. So rest assured, it's there. If you would like to look at it, it's up to you. Okay. So here we go. What is transdisciplinarity? That's my definition and understanding that transdisciplinarity is not a new science per se, but rather a new way of doing research with society when we are facing issues or challenges that are simply too complex for approaching from within academia only. That's just my summary of what I think it is all about. So as you can see, the first challenge of this definition is complexity. What do we mean by complex issues? For whom? by whom and for what. Complexity is a complex idea, and different people, different interest groups have got different understandings of complex issues. So that then takes us straight into the challenge of how do we form transdisciplinary research teams around the issues. And this we will do this afternoon in a bit more detail. I will take specifically what is called in the literature a socio-ontological approach to team formation. Basically, it's this argument developed by Noortjie Maar. No issues, no groups. So she's arguing for me, very persuasively, without issues, there can't be any groups. It's the issues, the burning issues that make us lie awake at night, that are complex and are haunting us. Those are the issues that in theory and in practice should bring us together. And that's what we're going to, I'll mention a bit during this lecture, but this afternoon in more detail about that. Now, the second important aspect of this definition is doing science or doing research with society. And in my understanding, that means, therefore, I conclude that transdisciplinarity or transdisciplinary research is, for me, fundamentally a methodology. And I must immediately say, this is not everybody is sharing this idea, this definition. Somebody like Bas Nicolescu will have a completely different idea. For him, it's more about a new science being established. It's a philosophy and all of this. I hear that, but that's not my understanding. It's more that transdisciplinarity is a methodology. Now, if that is the case, then it means, what do we mean by methodology? Normally, methodology asks the how question. How do we produce knowledge? We know there's complex issues, that is the what for, but how do we produce knowledge? That's the fundamental methodological question. That is what we need to share and think through. There's a lot of thinking to be done through that. So in the literature, you may have come across that methodology is very strongly sometimes associated, an equal sign between methodology and methods. You will see a definition of methodology that it is a study or a knowledge of methods only. And if you do that, you land up with a bit of a recipe book approach to methodology. And I think we should move away from that. I don't really like that, or it's too narrow, it's too instrumental. For me, methodology is about process, principles, and of course its methods. I'm not throwing methods away. I'm just saying, but it's only one of three aspects of methodology. One should be quite careful when you start using metaphors to try and explain concepts, but I couldn't resist it. I had to bring the old potjie in to say that if you want to visualize the three legs on which methodology stands, let's use the potjie as a South African example. But, okay, do you see that move? The potjie goes into the middle, around which sits the teams. And here, again, we come back to what are the interests and the needs and the issues around which we're going to sit down and make a meal, prepare a meal. Let's just hold on to that. Don't take it too literally. I'm just saying it's a metaphor. But I want something concrete to hold on to and say it's like coming around the good old potjie braai, and it helps us to understand. More importantly, if we use this idea, this concept, and again, this afternoon we'll go into more depth, as I said earlier on, into what we mean by that. For the moment, we are dealing with or looking at 4 equally valid research methodologies: monodisciplinarity, multidisciplinarity, interdisciplinarity, and transdisciplinarity. And I'm saying they are equally, or I would like to treat them as equally valid. I'll explain why. But in doing so, it's very important to acknowledge that none of these four, if we say they're really equal, none of them can be used as a panacea, as a one-size-fits-all approach for all problems that you're tackling with. And even transdisciplinarity. Here I'm going to make a bit of a confession. It's taken me a long time to come to this point, to accept that transdisciplinarity is one of four methodologies. And I'm not, in the beginning, when I discovered it, 2004 and 5, I just wanted to tackle every problem from a transdisciplinary perspective. And then I started, hang on, take it easy. There are other methodologies as well that we need to work with as equals. So therefore, I'm making this move to say even transdisciplinarity is not a panacea. We need to be, and I'll explain that more in more detail, know when we would like to use it. And this brings us back to the question of when. When do we use mono, multi, inter, and transdisciplinarity? And that brings us quickly into the importance of context, because we are dealing fundamentally with different kinds of issues. So monodisciplinarity is a valid methodology for dealing with issues that are well known. Well-established theories. You're dealing with well-established theories that sometimes need to be proven. And to prove a particular theory, you will use tried and tested methods. An example of this, so what this means is that individual disciplines will work independently on these clear issues without engaging with other disciplines or with societal stakeholders. They will just work in their particular individual disciplines to work with a theory, maybe prove it or disprove it, or use methods that are quite well established. An example of this is just something that caught my eye the other day. I'm not sure how good an example it is this article on the role of reproduction or sex in biodiversity. And the big debate here is whether Darwin or Wallace were correct. And I think they came to the conclusion that both of them were actually correct. But you can see when you do this kind of research, it's about evolutionary biology, that you want to prove or disprove a particular theory. And there's no need to engage with societal stakeholders. It's an internal evolution biology matter. There's no need to engage with stakeholders. Why would you? Why would you go and do that? No, not necessary. Multidisciplinarity or stroke interdisciplinarity is a methodology for dealing with issues that are less well known. There are no already well-established theories. There may be established hypotheses, which still needs to be developed into theories, but we're not quite there yet. And they will be working on what we will call complicated issues, as opposed to clear issues. And here we start seeing when you switch over to an inter or multidisciplinary mode, you will see the disciplines start to collaborate with each other. And what do? They start exchanging ideas, concepts, methods for better understanding the complicated issues on which you're working. And that's well established. I mean, maybe you are already doing that. An example of this is, again, something caught my eye. I saw the other day interesting stuff on the development of quantum computers. And it's physics and chemistry and engineering and computer science. These are all the disciplines that are coming together. They're working their backsides off the moment to develop what hopefully will become quantum computers that we'll all be using one day. Again, these are disciplines that are coming together and they're exchanging ideas and methods and ways of working together. And there's no need to engage with societal stakeholders about that. It's an interdisciplinary effort. Then when we come to transdisciplinarity, last but not least, it's a valid methodology for dealing with now complex or emergent issues that are of public concern. They enter into the public domain, matters of public concern. And here we will work definitely with nil hypothesis ideas. There is no hypothesis even developed for emergent ideas. They're just emerging. But our research may be very explorative, and we may want to use our explorative research to build hypotheses that will eventually be then further developed into theories. But we're not going to use necessarily well-established theories or hypotheses. We may have to build those still, bottom up. That's the kind of idea around transdisciplinarity. So here you will see, importantly, that the disciplines will still work together on the complex emerging issues, plus we start engaging with societal stakeholders. That's the difference. That is what's distinguishing transdisciplinarity from the other methodologies. And here the name of the game is knowledge co-production, meaning that we're bringing stakeholders, their tacit and experiential knowledge systems into the research process to help us understand, to formulate the research questions, the problem statements, and hopefully to look for some solutions. Now, I'm not sure about you, but this is quite a radical move to bring lay people with knowledge into the research process. From my perspective, we've been taught the opposite for many, many years. We should keep people and their emotions and their perceptions out of the research process because it's going to pollute the research process. Now we're discovering, hey, hang on, we need to actually work with people because they also know quite a lot about the issues that we're interested in. Now, how do we do that? How do we bring stakeholders and social actors into the research process to be co-researchers with us? Therein lies the rub. Therein lies the transdisciplinary rub. How do we do that practically? And more about that. But I just want to set the argument up here. So we're going to that again later on throughout the session and also this afternoon to show how important it is to work with the issues and bring relevant stakeholders around the issues that we perceive to be complex into the research process, to do research with us on the complex issues. And when I say that, it doesn't just mean it's problems out there that exist apart from us. We're also sometimes part of the problems that we're actually tackling. And you're also part of what you're researching. That's a challenge. Now, if we say that transdisciplinarity is fundamentally about knowledge co-production, which is not what mono and interdisciplinarity necessarily is doing, then the next question is, what kind of knowledge? What kind of knowledge should we be aiming to co-produce? Is it not? I mean, it's quite a logical question to ask. And in the literature, there are these three very valuable concepts, different kinds of knowledge that we could be co-producing when you adopt a transdisciplinary approach. Systems knowledge is factual knowledge of what is existing. Why are things complex? Why are they complicated? Why are they clear? I mean, that you're asking the is question, not normative questions. That is what the purpose of target knowledge is to be more values-oriented in knowledge. That's interested in what ought to be or what should be. Different kinds of knowledge. And then as opposed to transformative knowledge, transformation knowledge, which is interested in more strategic knowledge. How do we transition from where we are to where we would like to be in the future? Okay, so the moment we bring transformation knowledge into the transdisciplinary debate, we have to make, as I warned you a little bit earlier on already, quite an important move. from just practicing and thinking about transdisciplinary research to transformative transdisciplinary research. We just got a clear, explicit interest, not only in the understanding and explaining of issues, but in changing it as well. Without that explicit interest in change, we do not have transformative transdisciplinary research. And let me just say that I've seen many transdisciplinary research projects that are not interested in change, but they don't want to get into it. Maybe it's too complex or whatever, but there's no interest in it. It's not to say all transdisciplinary research projects should be interested in transformation, but if you are, then you just need to know what you're letting yourself in for. So I like to use this little triads as a way of explaining things, to say that sometimes in transdisciplinary research, our focus can be very much on just wanting to co-produce systems knowledge, of explaining and understanding what is. That's fine. That's valid. Or our shift may focus to target knowledge, to what ought to be or should be. What is it that we should be aspiring towards? That's also fine. It's valid. Or, as I said, we can actually also decide to explicitly adopt a transformative approach. So, you think that's possible? You think we can do all three of these kinds of knowledge in transdisciplinary research projects? It's a big ask. It's not that easy. Let me just share that with you straight away. It's not that easy. To try and do that as an individual transdisciplinary researcher is even more difficult. But if you are a team, you can do a bit of a division of labor to say that these researchers will focus on systems knowledge, these maybe on target knowledge, and the others on transformation knowledge. That you can do. But still, somebody will have to integrate that lot, manage that lot. Because what we are dealing with here is, sorry for that, but I'm coming from philosophy, that epistemologically speaking, we are dealing with three fundamentally different kinds of knowledge, each with their own, what I call epistemic objects, their own research problem statements and research questions. Did you get that, what I'm trying to say here? They're not the same kinds of knowledge. There are three, epistemologically speaking, three fundamentally different kinds of knowledge. Therefore, if we want to co-produce all three of these different kinds of knowledge in transdisciplinary research projects, we need to know what we're doing here. And that, of course, then asks the question, if you want to do that, co-produce all three, then it asks the question, methodologically speaking, what are the principles, the process, and the methods that we need to use in order to co-produce those three kinds of knowledge? That's the methodological challenge that we're dealing with here. So when our focus is then specifically, I'm just now zooming in, specifically on transformation knowledge, to co-produce transformation knowledge, if that is our focus, then just to say that there's a lot of working together or collaborative performativity that happens to do that. It's a lot of work, and we're not always exactly sure how to do it. We have to trial and error, and so I'll explain a bit more about this collaborative performativity as the lecture goes on. But just for now, if you want to do that, we should just ask this important question. If we're going to do a lot of things together, if we're going to perform a lot of things, activities, and using methods together, what is so transformative about the performative? And there's this excellent article by Kelly Oliver. She's written a fantastic article, which you will have, that explains that question. Just goes into that question. What is transformative about the performative? But a bit more about that later. So I just want to give you guys a feeling for process, the process that the process aspects of transdisciplinary research. I'm sharing with you here this excellent article by Thomas Jan on a framework of understanding what it means to bring society and science together into a process, to engage with each other. And you can see that he identifies it as, at least as three different phases. You can read the article in your leisure time if you want to. I'm not going to go into depth now, but you can see this middle section here is very graphically. What does that really mean? So when you're going to get into a transdisciplinary project and you want to follow a process, what I have done from time to time is to say you can break that middle section down into 4 or 5 different phases, and each of those phases will have different steps. And as a team, if you sit down, the team will have to decide, we're moving now through phase 1 or 2 or 3, and these are the practical steps that we will have to work through. That's just, what makes sense to me. So as you can see, some of the outputs of this process, of this idea process, would also involve developing new guiding principles and methods for how to do transdisciplinary research, because not all of that is already out there and available. So what does that look like? Guiding principles for guiding transdisciplinary research. In this excellent book by Christian Pohl and his colleagues, they've developed 4 principles. And again, you can read that in more depth afterward. Oh, sorry, it's called Principles for Designing Transdisciplinary Research. You got it. I've made it available. So that's already been written up. 4 guiding principles. Really, really, really useful. And you read it, engage with it. However, when we did the Nkanini case study, we found that those principles, yeah, we could work with them, but there was still something lacking there. We still felt we needed to develop our own principles for our research project, and that's exactly what we did. So we've written that up. We've added some more principles to help us guide a research project in an informal settlement in Stellenbosch, which is very, very different to what the guys are doing in Switzerland and Germany. And I've written that up in this article. And if you want to, you can again engage with it. But just to say that, as I said earlier on, there's quite a bit of work involved in developing new principles and methods. So this is just to give you a taste of the literature that we went through to develop the additional 5 principles that we did for the Nkanini case study. But as you can see, I'm saying there, this is work in progress. So if you want to go into transdisciplinary research, yes, nice challenge for you. This is not the end of it. You can still develop some more principles. See it as a challenge. Okay, so that's about the principles. Now when we come to methods, what methods should we be using to co-produce those 3 kinds of knowledge with? What methods? Again, you can see that there's quite a bit of stuff already written in the literature about methods, transdisciplinary research methods. And of course, it's up to you, you can use them. But in my own thinking, this is really an area that I'm particularly interested in, is can we develop some more methods? Because the methods that have been written up is not the sum total, there could be some more methods. So I have, in my own writings and write-ups, I have come up with a method called narrative action research. I'm not going to go into any depth now, but basically it's to bring narrative theory and action theory together and try and see whether we can use that for doing transdisciplinary research with. And what that method helps us to do is to actually then develop what I'm referring to as multi-layered thick mapping. More about this later on. I'm going to come back to this, what I mean by that. For the moment, I just want to share with you the application. Remember I said to you in the beginning, I'm going to share with you the Nkanini case study. I'm going to come back to the methods because it emerged out of this case. 50 minutes, okay. Again, it's been written up. The case study unfolded like this. Our students went into the informal settlement and they didn't know anybody there. There was no stakeholders that they could engage with. They had to walk the streets and see what are people doing. And what they saw when they started speaking to people is the people painting their houses. And they said, can we help you to paint their houses? And people invited them into their houses. That meant that the students stayed over for weekends in informal settlements, in the shacks. One of the students, or two of them that were staying in the shack, woke up one night. He was actually woken up by one of these big rats running around the place. And he said, hey, what can I do to help with my knowledge? How can we redesign a shack? And that led them to come up with the idea of an ice shack. And he brought quite a few disciplines together. You can see them there to design a new shack. That was the interdisciplinary phase of the project. That was then going into another phase of the project of co-constructing the design, building it together with local people and their local knowledge. The guy sitting on the roof there, Mr. Galada, he helped to co-construct practically an ice shack, which did not exist at the time. There's nothing like that there in South Africa, at least. And then after that, the first people started to live in the shack. And they gained some lived experiences of living in a newly designed shack. That finally gave rise to another phase where we handed over this research project to some entrepreneurs. No longer a research project, because they could now service and maintain the ice shacks and get paid for it. So for us, for me particularly, that was a challenge to say, we have developed this research project up to here. It's like a baby that you're nurturing, developing. Now you're going to hand it over to, you're not sure what's going to happen to that, but that's what we did. And it's still working. I can take you to the project now. We can go to Nkanini right now from here. I'm going to show you how it's working. So then there was another interesting development, quite a monodisciplinary side development in this project. Some engineers from the university wanted to build a prototype of the ice shack on top of the engineering building under more controlled conditions. They wanted to test whether the claims that we were making about the ice shack, whether it was valid or true or not. And at the time, that was quite a strange development. I was quite ready for it. But now when I look back on it, I now realize how important that was. Because when you do a transdisciplinary project, there's going to be people with an interest, with a more monodisciplinary interest in what are we doing here. And you should be agile enough to let them do it and bring them back. That bringing them back into the research process, I think we failed on that. We didn't really do that all that well. I'm going to skip these slides a bit here because I'm pressed for time. Just to say that in this research project, we initiated 3 small-scale social change efforts. The ice shack was one of them. There were 2 other ones on waste and sanitation as well. Those 2 fell by the wayside. The one that was standing was the ice shack. And again, it's difficult when something doesn't work out. You're feeling you're failing. But we've had to learn the hard way that failing is not always failure. A very, very important message. And from the ice shack itself, a lot of things were achieved. Like there was a policy impact. We established a business entrepreneurial operation and a new method. Some new methods came out of this ice shack example. And that's what I referred to earlier on as narrative action research. Because the storyline basically worked like this, that some of the students listened to the individual stories of people in the shacks. Typical anthropological, ethnomethodological methods, but as individual stories. My question was to them, what about the other 99 stories that you haven't recorded or listened or written up? Where are they? And then we realized there's a shortcoming in social science research methods. There's a need for developing a new narrative approach that can work with many stories. And that's what I then refer to as narrative action research. And as I said earlier on, that can contribute to something else called thick mapping. What do we mean by, you can read some more about that. And the process of a narrative action research process can look like that. Again, it can go through its own phases and steps. And when it comes to the new methods, this is what thick mapping may look like. We can do a lot of research, quite a lot of quantitative research on energy, waste, soil, financial flows, nutrient flows, financial flows, and also included people's lived experiences, their stories. And if we do that, then we can, that'll help us to co-develop systems knowledge, if we do that, by the way. And that'll help us to, this thick mapping can help us to set up what is now called the Internet of Nature. I don't know whether you've heard about that. Okay. So that's an interesting concept. So we can talk more about that later on. 5 minutes. Okay, almost finished it. So the Internet of Nature and the thick mapping is something that can be developed, set up, co-developed during the research process, if you're interested in that. Okay, there we go. Okay, so I skipped a little bit over some of the slides as you saw because we are pressed for time. What is the time now? 5 to 1. Okay. So sorry, I didn't keep to my time. Any questions from your side? Yes. Thank you.
I have one question, and that is about citizen science and how to. I mean, I have sort of a vague idea of what would constitute citizen science, and I know it is not interdisciplinary research, but also see areas and aspects that would overlap. If you would just briefly share.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Thanks for that question. Wonderful question. So, the question is about citizen science. Is that correct? No? Okay. So, for example, the way I figured that one out in using biophony or sonification is that it's quite high-powered technology that you have to bring to attach it to trees and plants. I'm busy speaking to some electrical engineers and soil scientists to do that. So as experts, we can bring that to the TV table, but then we need to work with local people and their knowledge of where to go and put it out. The indigenous knowledge of the area, the soil and the plants and tree, where should we use it? So that can help us to go and put it up and also to monitor it on a daily or a weekly basis. And we can sit down with them and study and make sense of the data that the stuff is coming through. So I've heard of citizen science where people go and take photographs of trees and plants. Wonderful. I just want to go a little bit one step further and say we can also listen to the sounds that these trees and plants that you're taking photographs of can produce, and what does it mean for us? That's how I will do it. I'm not sure whether I'm answering your question, but I had to think quite a bit about that. How to do that practically.
Thank you so much for the presentation. As you were presenting, I was imagining in my head, because as an academia, my goal is scientific outputs. So as you were looking at all those thick layers, layer 1, layer 2, layer 3, 4, I was like, now, per year, how much scientific output will I have from this? And it looks like the whole process, it takes all your energy, blood, and sweat into it. And I'm also looking at my other roles and responsibilities. What advice can you give in such a dilemma? Thanks.
The outputs.
The scientific output, something that you can submit to a peer-reviewed journal and you publish. Because I'm supposed to do that at least maybe a couple of papers in a year. And the process looks like it's taking years, and I don't know, and yet we are not yet done the actual research. Yeah, sure, thanks.
That is the challenge of transdisciplinary, is to do academic outputs and societal outcomes, because you also want to make a contribution to improving societal outcomes, more sustainable, more just outcomes. So, and one can easily fall between these two chairs. But when it comes to the academic outputs with articles, what we have done is to just adopt this approach of co-authoring articles. And it's not rocket science. You must just come together as a team and say, we want to focus on these issues, these complex issues, and we're going to co-author. And you're the lead author, I'm co-author, and you just divide yourselves, and you can quickly and you can write up. I mean, like I've written up our work on methods and principles and all of that. You can write on the process. You see, you must just reflect on that, and there's plenty of room to do exactly that. And there's a lot of transdisciplinary articles that are coming out every year, and it's not that easy. I hear you. It's a challenge. At the same time, as you're doing your academic outputs, you also have to look at what are the societal outcomes that you have to do something.
Also, at different stages, you can have different outputs. Like in the beginning, you could have a scoping review as you start going into things. Yeah. So during the project process, there'll be different results that emerge. You can plan for those.
The ideas that you have to write a paper about, it doesn't happen in the moment. The paper that the two of us are co-authoring now is ideas that have been percolating in my mind for a long, long time. Now we're coming to a stage where we can actually co-author a paper. It's tremendously satisfying to do that, but it didn't happen 5, 6, 7 years ago. I'm only reflecting on that work now. So you also have to pace yourself. When do you want to publish? With whom and all of that. It's a challenge.
You need to develop trust.
Yeah, but it's tremendously satisfying to co-author transdisciplinary papers. I love that so much. It's beautiful, lovely work.
Any other questions?
Thank you very much. I think my question is about managing the ethics of the research process. Because what I see from your experience in Ankanini is there are lots of things that emerged that were unexpected. And so how do you make sure that your research follows the ethical procedures and processes, but also captures the emerging spontaneous nature of what comes out from the project?
Yeah, excellent question. So again, there's more than one way to do that. One of the ways that we've done it was just to say to the ethics committee, you have to go through them, that there are certain issues we're going to work on that are complex. We simply don't know, they're emergent, and we can't tell you now exactly what is going to emerge. You just have to be explicit about that, and don't try and hide it or whatever. And then normally we haven't had much problems. We just have to be honest and explicit about it. To say we are doing transdisciplinary research on complex emergent issues, and and that's the name of the game. But I mean, you know, that ice shack that I showed you earlier on, what if that thing had fallen down and people were injured? You know, we couldn't foresee that. It may have happened, and it may have been egg on our face. So there's risk involved for sure. Just be aware of that. But having learned from that, I think the best advice I could give is just to say, be as explicit as possible about the emergent nature of the work that you're going to undertake.
And sometimes you need, amendments as well in the work that I've done. So you apply for ethics and then say, if anything changes in process, you'll apply for an amendment. And I found that quite quick with amendments. The turnaround time is much quicker than an original application.
So the one little method that I haven't spoken to you about is what we call now vector monitoring and evaluation. That's to just on an ongoing basis, monitoring and evaluate the emergence of the process. That information is worth gold because you can fold that back into the research process and give people an update of where this research process is going. But I'm just thinking aloud now, what you could also do is you can make an agreement with the ethics committee and say to them, as things emerge, we'll keep you up to date. You know, we're not going to try and sweep things under the carpet, but there's certain things we simply don't know now. But as and when they emerge, we've got some methods in place like vector monitoring and evaluation that can help us to monitor this stuff. As it comes out, as it emerges, we'll feed it back to you, keep you posted. So you can build trust, I think, with the ethics committee.
Any other questions before we close for lunch? I don't see any questions online, so anything else? Okay, one more.
Thanks, Astrid. I think it links to what you asked earlier. Just, you know, it seems so nice to have this baby, this transdisciplinary baby, like you spoke about, and to give, you know, it retention and work closely with your group and often and so on. I think I feel a bit torn between, you know, that ideal of wanting to be 100% in there with the research and then being a, you know, not at a center or an institute or so on, ordinary member of an ordinary department with all the teaching, research service, you know, all of those things. I guess that's where Astrid will help us find funding to buy some of our time out. But just, you know, that seems to me that I'd love to do this and to really emerge myself into all these emerging things. But how, you know, what do you think if you're just sort of a researcher with not a lot of funding yet? Yeah, about the approach and its viability.
On the funding, if your question is fundamentally about the funding, I've just seen over the years, since we started in 2005, a heck of a lot more funding calls coming out that actually got the word transdisciplinarity built into it, or interdisciplinarity. So much so that I started asking myself, is it becoming a fad now or what? So there's almost no shortage. I mean, not all the calls are asking for it, but there are a lot of calls that are specifically, that's the one thing. When we launched the Nkanini project, the NRF was asking for community engagement research. That's what they understood. And we said, okay, we can. So sometimes it's a matter of not even using the word transdisciplinarity. Just play cool. You don't always have to mention it. We can do community engagement amongst ourselves. We will call it transdisciplinarity as a research team, and we can write articles about that. The last thing you should do is a little off the point, but it's related, is that never use the word transdisciplinarity when you engage with societal stakeholders. You'll just confuse them. It's too heavy a word. I've learned and burned my finger many, many times. Don't try and be too learned. Here we come as transdisciplinarians. I think trans what? Transcendental meditation. What are you talking about? You know. So just be careful how you go about marketing and so on. But even with the funders, if they call it something else, like community engagement, go for it. You can write it up as a transdisciplinary case study. Nothing stops you. but get the money and start doing it. And that's how we did it. And work with small groups of people to start. You're not going to get everybody come sit around the fire with you. Sometimes that whole initial group is like really small, and then it starts to grow.
That's one thing I was just going to say, because the focus today was on teams. Do you have one last thing to say about teams before we close? Besides being things small?
I'll speak more about that. But one of the key challenges of forming transdisciplinary teams is it doesn't just happen at the beginning of the process. You have to sustain the energy and the interest of the stakeholders in your research. What's in it for them? Why should they come to your research process, into it? Why? What's in it for them? You need to understand that very clearly. And it's not always that easy, because you're also under the burden to produce academic outcomes. Now you still have to worry about what are the stakeholders, So again, you have to straddle these different challenges but you have to understand from the beginning, when you make your initial contact with your stakeholder, with your teams, and ask them the question: what is in it for you? What are your interests? What are your needs? And you need to understand that quite well, and make sure that you feed back during the process so that they stay in the process. I've seen stakeholders come and go. They walk away. You're not sure why. What happened? Where are they? They just disappear. So you need to make very sure that it's a sustained way of constituting and forming the teams.
One, I think we need to close in, but there's one more from Duplessis. So we have sometimes found it difficult to find journals that will publish interdisciplinary research. And some of these journals shared that they struggle to find reviewers who could review our papers. Do you have any tips for searching for journals that will accept TD research?
Yeah, there are specific journals that I've published in that are quite positively predisposed towards TD. Others not. We can make a list of that later on, but definitely there are certain journals that are more open to publishing. There's even some journals that will call themselves transdisciplinary journals or interdisciplinarity. Don't forget about interdisciplinarity, because I hope I brought that point across quite clearly, that I would go as far as saying that all transdisciplinary research will have some component of interdisciplinarity in it somewhere along the line. So don't forget about the interdisciplinary journals as well. And you can publish in those journals as well.